For today's episode of In the Chute, we discuss rotation of cattle wormer, horse wormer, and vaccines with livestock, something I'm not so familiar about.
Well, I think your familiarity with it is a little more than you're leading on. I mean, uh, let's take horse wormers and cow wormers, for instance. For both of them, you need to rotate the wormers. You're looking for breaking any kind of cycle of resistance that can be built up in some of those parasites. So, having a good wormer is one thing. Having a great wormer is another. But even a great wormer used repetitively over and over and over can cause the parasites that are there to build resistance, and that's not what you want to have happen. Otherwise, you're running out of tools to be able to control parasites. So, and you know that we've done that since you were a little kid.
Yeah, but the question would be like, when do you know when to rotate and stuff? Like, is it because that's the thing is like I'm always just the guy like, yep, I got the syringe, let's go do this. um,
Right.
it's I'm not the one ordering it or looking into the stuff. So like, is it do you do it like over a year and then maybe switch it the next year? Do you go back to it after that? Like after you've applied a different one? Do you have
Yeah.
name brands that you typically go with? Like what's the mentality or the science behind potentially the decisions that are made that make you rotate and when to rotate?
Yeah, cows are a little different. I mean, we don't worm our cows. Well, we do. We worm our cows biennially,
Yeah.
spring and early spring, and then in fall. So I shouldn't say we don't do that because we do the horses, the pasture horses, the same way. It's twice a year. So I like to rotate those wormers every other time if I can, or I'll use them twice, use them for a full year application of a spring and fall, and then the next year rotate to something else. And then the same with the horses. I really like to rotate those wormers on those horses every time if I can. But if I do two in a row, and then I'm sure to rotate to something else later, and then another rotation to something else, and then you go to something else and you can use it twice. So I like to have about three rotations between using uh, one for a full year if you can, and you probably can do more than that. Vets will tell you rotate it. I don't know what they do on their animals, but I certainly don't do it every single time, but I don't extend that. I don't use it more than twice. Let's put it that
Yeah.
way, and then I'll rotate. But I usually rotate some more in between using one twice. And the horse is in the pasture. I only get it spring and fall. And spring is when I bring them in and we vaccinate before you start getting any fly vectors, things like that. And then hit their yearly vaccinations and then worm them at the same time. You've got your hands on them. You're coming out of winter. It's a good time. Just any parasites that happens to be in them, then you're trying to flush them out, and then let them go until fall. And it's really late fall when we do it. And I don't really have a date other than we have some really good hard freezes, which will kill any uh, egg that are laid on the hairs of particularly their legs, like uh, bot flies lay eggs in the hair on their legs, and they will lick them. They'll consume them, and then inadvertently, and then ingest them. So when those eggs are no longer viable because of a good hard freeze or a couple of good hard freezes in the fall, then I'll go ahead and worm them for that wintertime and give them a good start so they're not packing parasites during the wintertime when it's cold, and they're using that energy for them and not just for themselves for staying warm and keeping some flesh on them.
So that's what the warmer. What about the vaccines? So I know there's different vaccines. For example, a great one for us in Montana, especially starting from the early 2000s to now, has been West Nile.
Right.
So do you use that same vaccine year after year in terms of like 2, 3 years and then you switch, or is it every other year? Is it every 2 years? Like how does that normally work?
No, with a vaccine, it's you're using that same vaccine because it's a formula, right? And it's
Sure.
preventative. It's not trying to do something after the fact to get rid of like worms.
Yeah,
You're
it's like a
trying to
flu
give them,
shot every year if you
it's an
go for the
immunity.
fall.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's you're giving them a shot. Initially, we'll give the colts, um, all of the horses get a shot in the spring, except for the colts that aren't foaled yet, right? And we'll give those mares a shot before the foals come, and they do have a little bit of immunity that way through the mother. It's limited, and then in the fall, I will go ahead as a yearling or weanling, uh, and sometimes we'll wait till the spring after the fall is or the cold weather is gone, give them their first shot as a coming yearling, and then 2 weeks later give them a booster. So you're not trying to get rid of a vector or a bug at that point. It's about building an immune system so that you prevent them from getting something, just like we do with a polio shot or
Right.
uh, any other thing, mumps, measles, rubella, that kind of thing. So, and then that's an annual shot after the first one, and then you give a booster 2 to 3 weeks later, is what we like to do, and then it boosts that immune system, and then they're on a yearly schedule like the rest of the horses. So that's an annual. It's and there's no reason for resistance because it's preventative. It's an immune system boost. There is really no resistance on that per se.
Looking at some things that we've seen with humans, I'm curious to see if you've ever experienced this with horses, but giving a shot to the mare before the foal has been born. Have you ever seen any issue with a birth, like a premature birth or an abortion, a late term abortion of some sort where it's messed up the life within the mare at all?
We haven't, and some of these are tested exactly for that. Your wormers, not just your vaccines, but your wormers are tested for that as well. And some will warn you, and that's why it's important to read those labels.
Yeah.
They will say safe for gestating and mares and colts. Uh, some will say not proven safe for stallions, can
Mm,
cause sterility in stallions. And I don't even use those. And there's a couple that have caused they're pretty strong wormers. They're pretty well known. They're well advertised. And the issue with them is if you kind of miss the size of the animal, because it's based on animal's size, the dosage is kind of roughly, you overworm them or give too much of it, and you can cause some neurological issues in the horse. There's
mm.
one in particular that's that way that we've never used. I just don't use it. I said, no, it's not worth it. Um, I can find other wormers and rotate other wormers at different times so that we break that resistance. Now, there's only so many wormers. There's not an infinite number of
Right.
types of wormers, so you rotate them as you can uh, in a spaced out manner. So you're not just skipping every other time as a different wormer. But I've never seen anything happen with our horses or calves. They're usually pretty well, safety tried in their trials, just like they have human trials for vaccines and some things or whatever you ingest in a medical uh, you know reasoning or a medical way to fix something. The same kinds of trials happen with these before they are allowed to be used by, guess what, Food and Drug Administration. FDA's got their mitts on that one too. So those trials do take place, and so far I've never seen any issue that was contrary to what they said in their advertising or what the label was. And so, I mean, it could happen. It can happen anytime. Usually, we're given these wormers and shots in the spring, you know, a month or so before the mare foals. It's not a lot of time, but it's certainly late term where if there was some issue and it caused them to start to go into labor, it's a risk. You may lose that colt, but I think that probably a lot of times they're far enough along that you might be okay too, but you don't know until it happens.
You were talking about the weight portion. That specifically goes with warmer. Is there some sort of a measurement when it comes to vaccines too, like per cc's, or is it just straight dosage no matter the size of the
Yep.
critter that you're giving it to?
Yep. They give a couple of cc's per animal, regardless of size, because it's an immune response
Yeah.
to that body. So it doesn't take much. And yeah, it's not that way. But most wormers come in about a 1,250 pound scale, 1,300 pounds, usually about 1,250. And then you look at your horse and you dose them down to their size appropriate in order to dose them. But the one thing we didn't cover is like horses that are kept up close to the buildings. Stallions, for instance, we keep them up. They don't run with the herd in the wintertime, so they are more confined and have more chance of picking up parasites from the ground than horses out in pasture. So I will rotate those wormers and worm them 3 to 4 times a year, every quarter or every 4 months, just as a preventative to make sure that we've got none issues. Or if I see, you're always looking at poop. We're poop
Yeah.
watchers, and so if I start seeing some worms in some manure, and I know it's right where that stud is at, I'm going to hit them again. I'm going to take care of that right away before it becomes a problem. And the same thing with some of these horses that are out in a pasture. They come in and you see them, poop. I'm walking over and I'm putting my foot in there and scraping it and mashing it apart to see if I can see any worms in there. It's just good preventative maintenance to know what the heck's going on. But things that are in confinement, they get wormed a little bit more often.
If they've got worms in their poop, is there something you have to do to kill the worms that are there, or just
They'll
leave it
die.
as it is? Yeah.
Yeah, they'll die. Yeah. And then you're looking to, because once you give a wormer, a lot of times they'll poop and they'll start sending a lot of them out at the
Yeah.
old canal. They'll die and they won't attach to the inside of the intestines or in the gut or wherever they're at, and they'll start being sloughed out. So you'll see them then too. And as far as a confined animal with the vaccines, same thing, once a year, same old thing, and then
Okay.
just a booster every year after that.
Well, that's vaccines and wormers on Hashknife. With that, we'll take that conversation and put it out to pasture.